Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Radium and today I have another video for all of you, in which today we're going to be doing something of a Terraria Calamity mod progression guide, as I've met a bunch of people who don't really know how to get started in the mod recently, so I thought I'd just shed some light on the process you're supposed to do in the three main stages of the game in separate videos. So the first one's obviously going to be pre-hard mode, then hard mode, then post-Moonlord, because there is content after the Moonlord in Calamity. And I feel like this is just a good thing to get out there, as there hasn't been one in a while. So with that said, there's not honestly too much to say about it, so I'm just going to get into the video process, and I hope you all enjoy. Before we really get into the guide, I just want to say I'm using Heroes mod, for the sake of obtaining items you're supposed to obtain in a shorter amount of time. The early game of Calamity is pretty standard when compared with vanilla. It's all about getting those minor power-ups so you can face your first boss, which in vanilla would be the King Slime or Rev Cthulhu, but in Calamity you have an alternate boss route, which is really fun. Additionally, there are some brand new enemies you can find on the surface, known as the Wolfram enemies. They're quite difficult to kill for a new player, but simultaneously they can drop some very good items, some very nice weapons early on. And those items can carry you all the way through the first boss if you're smart about it. So, as you'd probably expect, the main goal is exploring your world, building some NPC houses, just getting a feel of the game if you haven't played it in a while, and additionally getting any upgrades you can get your hands on, such as life crystal, mobility, gems, ores, just anything to increase your firepower. And once you've spent a longer time upgrading, you can really start. After a tiny bit more progression, your arsenal will start to look more like this, and you'll have some decently good for early game weapons in your disposal. And you could also get the Wolfram armor, which is a pretty good set for early on, as well as, if you're lucky, a couple of mobility items. These items are really just here for the sake of survival. They don't do anything statistically, but they are just very good overall, and I'd heavily recommend going mobility early game over damage. Now you've done all of this though, it's time for your first boss. But if you want to really spice up the game, you have the options of Revengeance and Death Mode in Calamity, which they serve as like difficulty boosters, but Revengeance has its own rewards, and Death Mode is just horrible. So, quite frankly, I'd recommend doing Revengeance for your first playthrough, but if you really don't like yourself, then feel free to do Revengeance. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. I'll be doing the presentations in Revengeance, just because it's a lot easier to do. But once you do that, you can obtain yourself the Desert Scourge's Desert Medallion, which is a summoning item, crafted from materials in the underground desert. In terms of its exact crafting recipe, it's 15 sand blocks, 3 antlion mandibles, 10 cactuses, and 1 stormlion mandible. And this fight is incredibly easy, so much so that you probably don't need to use any extreme methods or anything for this battle, and you should just be fine to spawn the boss in, and just play from there. A good strategy for this fight is just stay elevated, as the boss will struggle to reach you. And good weapons for this fight are a Jester Arrow, grenades, and any weapon with area of effect damage, my apologies. And you'll see they have nerfed Jester Arrows slightly, they're barely doing any damage to the main segment, but they will overall just do the most damage. And if you drop down like that, that's where you're looking at the big damage. Additionally, I don't think I'll be able to show you here because it's kind of hard to, but if you use Adrenaline, which means not getting hit for a certain amount of time, then you'll get a significant damage boost for 5 seconds, I believe. And remember, if you get hit a couple of times, it doesn't matter. This will be your first playthrough of Calamity, and as long as you don't get struck by the head in this fight, the consequences are very minimal. And there we go, that's the fight done. You get a treasure bag exclusive to Calamity from this boss, and you also get a lore piece, which is a Calamity mod exclusive thing, where it gives you bonuses, a bit of lore on the boss explaining what it does. And these items have their pros and cons, but they can be used in certain situations. The treasure bag he drops is pretty good. It has a wide variety of items, including a crafting recipe, or an item towards a crafting recipe of an amazing item much later on. You vanilla players must be very confused why these starfishes are useful, but in Calamity, there is an armor set you can craft from them known as Victide, and Victide is a very massive upgrade when compared with Wolfram. One of the more significant bonuses of defeating the Desert Scourge is access to a brand new biome. If you go underneath the underground desert, there is an amazing biome known as the Sunken Sea, which can provide you various really important resources, as well as a mini-boss known as the Giant Clam, who will drop an NPC, and that NPC will sell some incredibly good early game items, which I used for a long while. After the Desert Scourge is defeated, you can obviously go through the regular state of progression of fighting the King Slime and Eye of Cthulhu. It's completely optional in the way you do them, but they're both relatively simplistic fights. But I just thought I'd show you this, as this is an example of the new Revengeance mechanics. So, for those who've seen King Slime in 1.3, he's very, very basic. And by using a platform, or in this case, even a single pylon of rope, you can defeat the boss with no mess at all. However, these mechanics in Revengeance are meant to make this uncheesable, and you'll see this gem comes off of the boss. This will make the fight significantly harder, as you need to constantly be dodging projectiles from above. And the King Slime is also given a super jump ability, which is incredibly powerful. So these little changes are what make Revengeance mode something else. And Death mode only amplifies those qualities. The next step of Calamity is making an artificial mushroom biome on the surface. This isn't technically necessary because it's only used for a single boss in the game. But in my opinion, being able to fight on this boss on the surface makes it so much simpler. So I'd heavily recommend doing this for yourself. Just for the sake of just life quality really. And obviously if you go down the ranger route, it's incredibly helpful for Shroomite later on. So with this biome, all you need it to do is be a mushroom biome. You don't need to build a house until hard mode. But just by spamming it with these, you'll turn it into a mushroom biome, and it only needs to be a single block of mushroom to start the fight. So you can just compress loads of mushroom blocks into one, and do that, if you don't want it clogging up your world. The boss we are fighting now is Crabulon, which is the mushroom biome exclusive boss. You summon it using the Decapodita Sprout, I believe it's pronounced, which is crafted from 25 glowing mushrooms. It's a pretty simplistic fight, but you summon the boss and you just get to it really. It's a very peculiar fight because the boss comes towards you and spores come off of him, which you can take down fairly easily with whatever weapon you're using. And this is where some of the Desert Scourge weapons can be utilised. For example, I got the Seabound Staff from my treasure bag, so I'll use that here. It doesn't mean I'm going to be a summoner, but it's just a nice item to have. Now this boss will use some projectiles which cover your screen, and it can be overwhelming for newer players, considering the incredible damage of these attacks, but once again this boss is relatively easy, and once you defeat it, it has some really nice rewards for you. And here we go guys, the fight is nearly done now. Once we have done this, then we have a really good item to obtain, potentially at least, from these treasure bags, because you get these items called Revengeance mode exclusives. There we go, the Mushroom Plasma Root, and this will give your Rage mode 15% permanent damage. We additionally got some really strong weapons like the Hyphae Rod, which is very good. And you also get a Fungal Clump, which is a nice accessory for early game. It's a healing item. After you've done that fight, you have several event options to do, because you can do the Goblin Army, but you can additionally do the Acid Rain event, which is something that happens after you defeat the Eye of Cthulhu, I'm pretty sure. And it floods your world with acidic rain, and you have to stop it by defeating a certain amount of enemies in the Sulphurous Sea, which is the ocean biome past the dungeon in your world. So my Sulphurous Sea will be on this side down there. Yep, there we go, and this is the biome. I'm kind of stuck, which wasn't good planning from me, but it's a very simplistic yet fun biome that you'll be using a lot later on. So I'd try and get used to it at some stage in my opinion. After you've done the events of your choice, then you've got some Crimson enemies to defeat, because the next boss in terms of standardized progression is the Brain of Cthulhu. This is a boss you'll most likely be quite familiar with as of now. So you'll summon the fight and you'll just do it as you normally do. Pierce weapons with good knockback normally do amazingly for the first phase, and grenades can also just shred through. But after you do this, the brain will become somewhat enraged and it'll do its standard attacks slightly differently. This is a fun fight, but one I definitely take precaution for. Just for all of your knowledge, this is the Revengeance mode exclusive attack for the Brain of Cthulhu. He'll spin around with his 4 illusions and he'll do a weird attack. This can normally be dodged relatively easily just by dashing or jumping over him if you don't have a Brain of Cthulhu in your loadout. And it is very simplistic. Sometimes he doesn't do the dash at all. And although the fight is good fun, you won't really need to prepare for it or anything, as most of the time you can do it with no fuss at all. Just remember those projectiles he spawns will do a good amount of damage if you don't dodge them well. Okay, the brain is about to fall, and there we go. This will obviously enough give you access to crimtane and tissue samples. Or if you do the opposite fights, which will be the Eater of World and the Hive Mind on Corruption, then you'll just obtain these resources. You'll be able to upgrade your armor massively. But it really depends on whether you like Victide or not, because it gives some good offensive bonuses with less defense and regeneration than crimtane. And I'm sure it's better than Shadow Scale. After that fight, there is another boss you can do in the Crimson, known as the Perforators. This is an incredibly difficult fight, and a counterpart to the Hive Mind on the Corruption Worlds. Because obviously there's two bosses, one U on each, like Crimson and Corruption. My apologies if the explanation isn't good, but here's the boss. He's a bit of a strange one, but it's a fun fight. You'll need to dodge him, and he has 3 different stages, summoning progressively larger worms each time. I'd recommend taking out these worms individually, just saying. Just because it will make your life so much easier if you do that. After the boss is defeated, you'll have access to blood samples, which are used to craft some incredibly useful weapons at this stage, but additionally, you get access to something even more valuable. You get Aerialite blessed with your world. And Aerialite is a very special ore. It's something you can mine. It pretty much spawns in the early underground caverns. And it's used to craft Aerialite stuff, which is a really good set. I just want to quickly add on that although you can craft the Aerialite bars at a regular anvil, which are just crafted with 4 Aerialite ore like no other items, you have to craft the weapons and armors at a sky mill, which you find in the Sky Islands. And they also have a very simplistic crafting recipe. You can get some very good weapons from these though, such as the air spinner, which is a good yo-yo, the feather knives, which are a rogue weapon, which is a new class added to Calamity altogether, and so much more. And these items will really help you take down the Queen Bee, Skeletron Prime, and any other challenges Pre-Hardmode really has to offer you. The next fight I'm going to show you is the Queen Bee. I'd recommend doing this fight in the underground jungle because the boss becomes enraged on the surface. It's another fairly standard fight, but it'll give you some potentially really good resources to use for future battles. And one thing I'd say about it is utilising the Aerialite items will make this an absolute cakewalk. I haven't crafted the armour for myself on this character, but it will just make it incredibly simple. Now, I'm sure most of you have fought Queen Bee before, and the fight doesn't change too much, even in Revengeance, and only really changes once Death Mode becomes a thing. But once you're halfway through, the AI does have a minor shift, but nothing you guys can't handle. The Queen Bee battle is coming to an end now, and the items you get from the Queen Bee are still incredibly useful, even in Calamity. Because weapons such as the Bee Nades, the Bee's Knees, which I didn't get this time around, and other items like that kind of caliber are really useful. So I'd heavily recommend getting them, as the Skeletron fight will definitely challenge you guys. But you're making pretty good progress on Calamity, you're continually powering up, and the main goal is to have max life by the time you do Skeletron, at least for a new player. Just because you're gonna need that extra HP to tank the hits, as getting used to the AI is definitely something. And you don't want to lose without even having a chance. Okay guys, the next fight is obviously enough Skeletron. This fight has a lot of baggage on it, and if you can do this battle then you have access to some really amazing items. I'm using God mode to show you off some of these because, well, I've not got a lot of time to record this video. But this fight is relatively simplistic if you use a bundle of balloons, the Skyline Wings, which is an Aerialite item, or just items of that caliber. They'll really help you in your case. But my recommendation, utilize a grappling hook, just float around the boss, and build your arena better than I did. As once you do this fight, you have access to a lot of modded content. The dungeon has been renovated slightly with the addition of the Calamity mod, but the most important item you'll want to get from all of this would for sure be the Shadow Key, because you can't just loot chests from hell. There's additionally another area you can now explore in the Abyss, which is an ocean biome below the Sulphurous Sea. It's kind of hard to get your head around, but I'll give you the basics on how to survive for early game. At this stage, the only way you can really get into the Abyss is using Gills potions, and maybe an Arctic diving gear if you were lucky enough to find one, which you find in the underground snow biome. This is a pretty dangerous area to be exploring, so be fast about it and just very careful. You normally just drop into one of these crevices and it begins, and I believe I've found it. There we go. It'll start this new song, and even the Gills potion won't be working fully correctly. But the most important thing about this biome is in these chests it contains different accessories and items, which will prove to be incredibly useful to you in the upcoming bosses. For example, the herring staff is a brilliant summon I'll be using for the penultimate boss of Pre-Hardmode for sure. And there's also melee, rogue, ranged and magic weapons all down here. Additionally, I just want to clarify, you can break this stuff, it just takes such a long time to mine. And some people give up mining it before they realise, so I just wanted to let you all know that. We additionally got the lionfish, which is a brilliant item. See, this is a really nice and funny area to explore. One I'd heavily recommend doing so at some stage, as all of these items can benefit you at some stage in the game. Just don't go too deep, otherwise you get what's known as the difficult enemies. After you're done exploring in the abyss, you have an incredibly difficult fight on your hands. The next boss you have to do is the Slime God. This is a fight crafted from 25 of any evil block and the Blighted Gel, which is a fairly easy resource to obtain. You just get it from the Crimulian or Corrupt Slimes in the Corruption and Crimson biomes, which are abundant enemies that spawn. They're just slightly larger slimes that move quite fast. But the fight itself is an absolute nightmare. I'd heavily recommend preparing properly for this, as I'm obviously still using no hit. But I would get destroyed with this kind of loadout. You're going to want a bundle of balloons or some wings, which you can get using aerolite materials. Just anything of that sort will help this fight greatly. And there is some incredible items you can get from after this fight. So I'd heavily recommend doing it, even though it is a hassle. And the first time I ever tried it, I had to use late hard mode items, like past the mechanical bosses, to do this fight, just as I was so clueless on how to do it. The best method is building multiple really long strips, and just running across them really. After you do the Slime God, you have access to Purified Gel, which is used for crafting the best set in all of Pre-Hardmode, the Staff Gel Armor. This is crafted from Hellstone bars and the gel itself, and both of them are amazing, but this gel is also used for various really strong weapons, as well as an alternative route to the tools from Hellstone. So like the Carnage and Knight's Ray, the Geltic Blade, all of these weapons are really good and usable for the Wall of Flesh as far as I know. And I'd heavily recommend trying some of them out, as they're all really fun. After a long journey, you're finally ready to fight the Wall of Flesh. Use the Guide Voodoo Doll, obviously. Just chuck it into the lava and you'll be good to go for this fight. One thing I'd recommend, obviously, is using pierce weapons or weapons with area of effect damage, as these will really make the fight a lot easier to bear. And a good strategy is building a single world platform throughout the entire world and just moving to the right. This is the best strategy in the game for the boss, as if you sync the boss up correctly and stay parallel to the main eye, then he'll never be able to hit you. After the wall has fallen, you'll have access to various different materials, and most importantly the Demon Heart as of now. You'll also get a Demon Trophy which permanently boosts spawn rates, and the Hermit's Box of 100 medicines which spawns you at full health, which is honestly kinda nice. With that said though, that's pretty much all there is to Pre-Hardmode. There are different minor events you can do and smaller things with various new weapons, but that's the main progression you'll need to focus on, and you'll learn the rest through just experience. And many people ask me for a basic progression guide on just how to pass the game. I will be doing these occasionally. I don't know how long this will take to make, so I may have to miss out on a couple of daily uploads to get these out, but I really enjoyed making this one. So with that said, I have to say thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I will see all of you in the next one. Peace out, guys.